as you can see in the title, this week's episode is called To Mayor or Not to Mayor. My biggest takeaway from this episode was me making a conscious decision to focus on my wife in a moment doesn't take away from who I am.
Yeah, and what came out to me in our conversation was it's good to have a conversation with your spouse, even if you think it's just a fleeting thought that can just bring a conversation and intimacy and like a window into your thought process for your wife. So continue listening for the full conversation.
All right. So this story I have to share with everybody goes back a little bit, maybe a couple months now, where my wife and I go out to dinner. And I happen to see some, well, I don't know if I can call them friends, but some acquaintances from high school. It just happens to be a table of women that I've known for a long time, but don't necessarily converse with on a regular basis or at all. Right? It's just someone I saw sitting near us that I recognize and had known, had previously been friends with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm also trying to be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Intent on having just a nice dinner with my wife. And since we have 3 children, being intent about just focusing on the 2 of us. Now, with that being said, for as long as my wife's known me, she's called me, in air quotations, if you're not watching this, but listening on the podcast, the mayor, right? And it's because everywhere we go, it seems no matter where we go, even when we travel, I always run into somebody I know. Like we've been in different states where it would be just the 2 of us, and I run into somebody I know. She's like, I don't understand. How is this even? But that just happens to be my life. I kind of like it. It's cool, If you really think about it, like you're never alone because you always want to,
Right.
right. But in this instance, I checked myself from being air quotes mayor for I think a couple reasons. One, like I said, is because I was intent on trying to focus on my wife and being better at that because we get limited time together. Secondly, I didn't know if I were to approach and or wave and or just acknowledge this table of women that she doesn't know at all, how she would react. Like, would that ruin the night? You know what I mean? Now she knows me to be the mayor, but I didn't want to risk ruining our night. Sorry. And just chopping it up with men on a day-to-day basis, you hear a lot of stories about how relationships change from being boyfriend and girlfriend to being engaged to being married, how some expectations change. And I think that may have subconsciously been playing in my mind, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna let that be. And I did not acknowledge these people known for more than half of my life.
Wow. That brings up definitely a interesting thought process of how and why that plays out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, for those of us who haven't married um our high school sweetheart or anything of that nature where there's a potential, especially if you live in the same town or even if you live in the same place where you went to college, right? You may not see everyone that you went to college with, but I happen to run into people because I live at somewhere where I only went to college here, like I didn't grow up here. So I run into people or groups of people all the time, and it's just like, what do you do sometimes? So I feel that, or the questions that come um with who is that person, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
who are those people? So I think I've thought about it, but never. I like that we brought this up as a topic today because, yeah, I mean, especially there's a lot of ways that could hurt a relationship. Let's just not talk. I like your example, but let's talk broadly, right?
Yeah.
So, say you and your wife have a good relationship now, but before you met her, you may have been a person that had suspect dealings with female friends, right?
Tag player, player.
Yeah, right. So, you may have had friends in air quotes, but they were basically friends with benefits, right?
Hmm.
Netflix and chillers, whatever you want to call them. So potentially every female that you meet that your wife doesn't know, there might come a set of questions, or at least one question
Right.
with that. So if you're out trying to have a focused dinner with your spouse and you see that happen, then I could understand just being like, nope, and moving on, right?
Yeah.
Um, Another thing could be just not even that, but maybe if your spouse has some insecurities just around other women in general, like maybe she's had a past or has groups of friends where, or family members where things have happened from friend groups or people in the past that have turned a lot of the relationships that they know sour. So, that could be a thing. Um, so I could definitely see how it is, but it's weird because it is just being who you are,
Right.
and running into people you're not planning on. So it's kind of that I want to it's making the choice to put your marriage first.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also you realize it's you not being you or a part of you. Um, and you have to figure out when to make that choice.
Yeah. I mean, the thought definitely goes through your head like, man, I'm acting like I'm whipped right now. You know what I mean? And I don't know, man. It felt strange to suppress that part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like I made the right choice, but I think that's part of this discussion as well. Like, was that the right choice?
I think, well, in the grand scheme of things, yes. I can answer that quickly. Yes, in the grand scheme, right? Because at the end of the day, you are choosing your, in that situation, I'll say, you're choosing your marriage, you're choosing your wife over others,
Right.
all others, right? You're choosing your relationship over all others.
Mhm.
Um, in the To just think about it a little bit though, after that situation happens, do we have a talk with our wife about said situation?
I
Like,
did.
hey, right. So in yours, so since we'll come back and make it specific. So how did that go? If you can share on the pod.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't much of a conversation. I mean, I basically, so I don't think I had the conversation that you're talking about, but I did mention to her, like, hey, the group of women that just left, I went to high school with them. I've known them for a long time. And I think maybe I was looking for a reaction from her
Mm-hmm.
to see if it was a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't get that reaction, like one way or the other. It wasn't like, oh well, I'm glad you didn't, get up and say anything to them or whatever, or like, why didn't you say anything to them?
Mm-hmm.
He was just kind of like cool with how the situation played out, I guess. Um, but in my particular situation, like my wife has been cheated on in the past, like when she was a lot younger.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that has something to do with why I didn't want to even like broach that. Like, not that she would think that of me by
Mm-hmm.
any, but like, why stir that pot if it doesn't need stirring? You feel me?
I do. I do.
And I'm gonna sit on this one. And then beyond that, and this thought went through my mind in the moment. I know who these women are, right? And think about what that statement is. I know who they are. Just name.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen them in so long. I haven't spoken to them in so long. I don't know how they live their lives. I don't know much about them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I probably won't see them again for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
If so, what effect does it have on me or them for us not to have a conversation in this moment? Or even just an acknowledgement?
Right.
There's probably no feelings hurt. And I shouldn't even be concerned about their feelings either. So there's nothing lost in this lack of a transaction, is where I landed. And I'm like, you know what? I'm cool.
No, that makes total sense, because it's a happenstance that you ran upon them
Mm-hmm.
anyway, but it's not a happenstance that you're out with your wife for a meal,
Right.
right? So any risk per se, another air quotes, um, was averted in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, I'm thinking more, if it was a fleeting thing that happened, right? Um, so it's just like, oh, let me think about it. Done. Okay, not doing it. Going to eat. Great night. Whatever. Bring it up at the end. It's fine. What what I'm thinking of is, if this is an issue within a husband, right,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more than just a fleeting thing, right, and you're
Right.
now feeling like, I'm kind of not being myself when I'm out with my wife, right, or my fiance or whoever, and um, that's when I'm thinking maybe you need to have like a conversation about how you feel, right?
Yeah.
One of those like, okay, these are the situations. I feel like I'm not being myself. How do you feel? Um, does it even bother you if I if I see? And if it doesn't, good. At least you were. And this is one of those things where a couple episodes we talked about just having more conversations just about things in general. It's like thoughts in our head. So this would be a perfect example to just bring something up that we may be thinking about. And most wives would probably appreciate that you even bring something like this. Well,
Right.
in my case, because I don't talk as much as she would like me to. Um, and it could just spark a totally different conversation, right? And it's a being vulnerable that, brings connection within a marriage. But yeah, definitely, if it's an issue, um, or even just a lingering thought, just have that conversation. Most of the time, it probably won't be a big deal. But if something does come out of it where there might be issues, that also gives you a chance to grow as a couple, and really show her that you're putting a stake in your marriage, and not really, um, as you grow through it, that's what you're doing. You're investing in your marriage, not really just the things that are comfortable for yourself.
Yeah. And you got me thinking, like, in a typical situation where, I run into someone I know and she's with me, this is not a second thought. I say, what's up? But the way this situation typically plays out, because of social media, these people that I run into typically know at least who my wife is, or not who she is, but like they know that's my wife, right? They see all the pictures, they see
Mm.
posts, and all the interactions, right? And I would say a good 70% of the time, before I even get a chance to introduce her, they're already talking to her because they feel like they know her. You feel me?
Right.
Or they're kids, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or they want to make a joke at my expense and they're like, oh, you're dealing with this guy, or you know what I mean? Something
Yeah.
along those, like just cutting up, right? So this has never really been a thought that I've had to run into, which is why I was like, we need to do an episode on this. And purely for the fact that it was all women, that's what stopped me. If one of them had their husband with them, which one of them is married to like a high school sweetheart type of deal, so that means I know him as well.
Mm-hmm.
This never becomes a conversation.
True story. I mean, that's absolutely true. Right. That's
It's
that's
like,
an
so
interesting
fuck off.
thing.
It's yeah.
I think it's solid though, because I think these are the small things that we as husbands just don't talk about. And it's the small things that we don't maybe consider. But you were totally thinking about your marriage and, well, your night, first of all, the
Yeah, yeah.
intentionality that you wanted to have and your marriage. So it does warrant not to mayor if there's ever a question that it could, have an ill effect. Because it wasn't like you were hiding anything, right?
Right.
That's the thing. You're not hiding anything. It's just, I want to enjoy my evening, and I want to keep us where we're focused on each other. So let's just do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And the funny thing is that uh one of our friends works in this restaurant as a server, and he's a mutual friend. So he comes over, like sits down with us for a little bit, right? And so there was still an event that interrupted our night, but it was a mutual friend and he was welcomed by both.
Hmm.
I don't know, man. Like, it's funny because reflecting back on this, it it shouldn't have really been a big thought, right? And it's something that mentally I'm like, I feel like I'm making more of it than I really should,
Mm.
right? Rest through this pretty quickly and made the decision like I'm just not going to do this. And I feel like I may have even shifted in my seat a little bit just so I could be more focused on my wife. I um very rarely took my eyes off of her as we sat and had a conversation before the meal came, during the meal, afterwards. Um, but it was enough of a thought where I felt that I needed to tell her afterwards, right?
Hmm.
Um, and what I also want to be careful of is I don't want to make the impression that my wife is anything less than what she is, right?
Hmm.
She is not, I don't believe, the type of woman to make a huge deal out of this. But I think my consideration in that moment was this could possibly make her upset. So like why like I don't gain anything from saying hi to these people.
Right.
you know, so why even like touch that? It's just not, it's not worth anything. There's no value there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that would have came up was this is, oh, hi, how you doing, blah blah blah, we should blah 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 together, and I'll check up, we should stay in contact, blah blah blah, gone. Never stay
Yeah.
in contact, never again,
Yeah.
peace out. Like, so.
I think what I didn't want to happen was it to like turn into, oh, I haven't seen you in so long. Give me a hug. And I'm like, ah, see, now you didn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and all that is just in a flash thought.
Right.
So, and then it's like, decision made, I'm gonna focus on my wife today, and we're gonna have a great dinner. So yeah. But I think it all comes back to considering your wife, and um just fostering, and you know thinking about your marriage, which is something that we as husbands should do often, kind of make it second nature, like you did. This is
Hmm.
kind of just one of those examples, and so I think that's good to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. And I like what you said earlier. I think maybe we'll finish on this. Um, what you said earlier about having more conversations about more topics, right? And what I'm realizing is the the more practice you have in that, the easier this situation becomes, right? So let's just say you're back at that restaurant at dinner and you are so well versed in having conversations with your wife about every little thing, it becomes more difficult for you to take your attention away from your wife. So maybe you
Mhm.
don't table because you're just locked in.
Right.
So I kind of like that idea.
Yeah.
So maybe I just need to be better.
Yeah. We all we all need to be, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm cool with ending it there, man.
Yeah, that was good.
So short little episode for y'all, but hey, come back because we'll have another one next week.
For sure.